Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go. That's right.
I'm the Reverend Dr. Jamie Mathias, pastor of Holy Family Catholic Church in Austin, Texas. Do you know your neighbors? That seems a legitimate question in this day and age, especially in neighborhoods like mine in East Austin. In my spare time, I assist the Kellogg Foundation with the study of gentrification and displacement in East Austin. In East Austin, in an area bounded by IH-35 to the west, Lady Bird Lake to the south, Pleasant Valley to the east, and MLK to the north, 575 homes have been sold during the past 5.5 years, leading many people wondering who their neighbors are. And in the focus groups that we've been hosting, many people have told us that they don't know their neighbors anymore. In today's gospel, a scholar of the law asks Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. And what's the answer? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love the Lord your God, and who else? Your neighbor. So the scholar of the law asks a legitimate question. Who is my neighbor? That is, who do we need to love if we want to inherit eternal life, if we want to go to heaven? Just the people who live in the houses or apartments beside our own? Just the people who live on our own block or in our own neighborhood? Or just the people who are like us or who are from our city or state or country? That's what the Jews in Jesus' day had concluded, that the word neighbor included other Jews, other Israelites, other people like them. They didn't have any responsibility to love or care for their enemies, which is why Jesus made them so uncomfortable by suggesting that they needed to love and forgive their enemies. And who were the enemies of the Jews in Jesus' day? Their enemies included anyone who was part of the Roman Empire, the empire which ruled over the Jews in Israel. And because tax collectors colluded with this empire, taking the Jews' money and property so as to give to Caesar what belonged to Caesar, tax collectors were seen as the enemy too. Their enemies included the Greeks, who under Alexander the Great had previously conquered Israel and imposed their language and customs and gods on the region. And after Alexander the Great died, his generals fought against one another, waging wars throughout Israel. They desecrated the temple that the Jews had rebuilt, and they killed those Jews who were unwilling to worship their gods. And the enemies of the Jews included people like the Samaritans. Ew, the Samaritans. Because the Samaritans were longtime rivals of the Jews. To be clear, the Jews knew that there were absolutely no good Samaritans in this world. The Samaritans were all evil, despicable, worthless, wretched schismatics who split from the Jewish religion and who preached that God was to be found on Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing, rather than in the Jerusalem temple where all of us knew that God dwelled. To be clear, God lived in the temple in Jerusalem, not on Mount Gerizim. If you wanted to send God a letter, you had to address it to the temple in Jerusalem. Or if you wanted to send God an email, the address was god@jerusalemtemple.org. We all knew where to find God. God was in the temple in Jerusalem, and God was nowhere to be found among the Samaritans. The Samaritans. So, the story that Jesus tells in today's gospel is absolutely shocking. In fact, it's offensive to any good religious person like me. In today's gospel, Jesus tells the story of a person who's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and on the way that person is robbed and beaten and left half dead. So along comes the Jewish priest, and as good Jews, we all know that the priest was going to be the hero in the story, right? And so what does the priest do when he sees the person who's been robbed and beaten and left half dead? He what? He crosses over to the other side of the road and he keeps on walking. Well, he must have had a good excuse, right? Maybe he was late for Mass, an anachronism, I know. Or maybe he was just remembering the prescription in the Jewish law that forbade people from touching dead bodies, because touching a dead body makes you ceremonial unclean after all. But fortunately, along comes another good guy, a Levite. We all know who the Levites were, right? The Levites were the holy holies of Jesus' day. They were the descendants of the tribe of Levi, the only Israelite tribe in which all the people, all the Levites, were priests. The Levites were pledged to divine service, and they were the only ones who could perform the ceremony to redeem your firstborn child. And the Levites were the ones who were holy enough to read the Torah, the Jewish law, at the synagogue every Sabbath. So in the story, along comes the Levite, and as good Jews, we all knew that the Levite was going to be the hero in the story, right? And so what does the Levite do when he sees the person who's been robbed and beaten and left half dead? He what? He crosses over to the other side of the road and he keeps on walking. Well, he must have had a good excuse, right? Maybe he had a more urgent matter to attend to, or maybe he believed that the poor person who was robbed and beaten and left half dead really deserved what he got, right? And so now that we're really not sure where this story by Jesus is going, along comes another person, a Samaritan. Ooh, a Samaritan. And what did the Samaritan do? As good Jews, I suspect we all know what the Samaritan did. He looked away and kept on walking, and he didn't even have a good excuse like the priest and the Levite. He just ignored that person who needed help, and he kept on walking, right? Say what? He did what? The Samaritan was moved with compassion. And the Samaritan stopped and went over to that person who was robbed and beaten and left half dead and bandaged his wounds and picked him up and put him on his own animal and took him to the nearby inn where he took care of him. And then the next day, when he had to leave, he gave the innkeeper money and told him to take care of that person who was robbed and beaten and left half dead. The Samaritan did that. The Samaritan. And so, after he finishes that whopper of a story, Jesus asks the scholar of the law, which of these three people, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, was neighbor to the robber's victim? And the scholar of the law was so disgusted by the thought that he couldn't even say the word Samaritan. The Samaritan. Instead, he said, the one who treated him with mercy. Wow. In the end, it was the Samaritan, the enemy of the Jews, who turns out being the hero. In the movies, when someone's in need, a superhero appears to help them. Who's the superhero in this story? The priest? No. The Levite? No. The Samaritan. Do you want to be a superhero too? When I was a child, I had to memorize a lot of answers to a lot of questions in order to receive my first communion. I distinctly recall some of those questions and answers. Who created us? God created us. Why did God create us? To know, love, and serve God. And so as a child, I used to think that life was all about knowing, loving, and serving God. But as an adult, I'm convinced that the same could be said of our relationship with others. That we were also created to know, love, and serve others. And that there really are no good excuses for not knowing and loving and serving those around us. Our family members and friends and co-workers and neighbors, and yes, even our enemies. When St. Paul was a child, he believed that he had to follow the 613 precepts of the Jewish law to the letter. As an adult, though, he came to believe that the entire law could be summed up in a single command. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There are all sorts of people in need in this world. They are our neighbors. It seems we're called to know and love and serve them. Yes, we could make all sorts of excuses for why we don't know, love, and serve them, but let's stop making excuses like the priest and the Levite, and let's start being superheroes, reaching out to those in need, like the Samaritan. The Samaritan.
We are family.